Hello everyone, it's Jo here. I'm currently going through the Bible in 1 year again, and for the last few days I've been reading the story of Joseph in Genesis. It's one of my favourite Old Testament stories because it has everything: betrayal, twists and turns, trickery. It's a real page turner. It begins with a slightly obnoxious 17-year-old boy called Joseph, who is his father's favourite of 12 sons. So he's singled out by his father and given a special colourful coat. Understandably, his brothers are quite annoyed by this, so already tensions are difficult between them. Then Joseph has a couple of dreams, one where he and his brothers are binding sheaves of grain in the field, and Joseph's sheath stands upright and his brothers' sheaves all bow down to Joseph's. Then Joseph had another dream where the sun, moon and stars were all bowing down to him. Joseph quite unwisely told his brothers these dreams, and unsurprisingly his brothers were not happy about it. One day things come to a head, and his brothers plotted to kill Joseph. His brother Reuben stepped in and got the brothers to agree not to kill him but to throw him down a well. Then when Reuben's back is turned, his brothers sell him to a passing merchant. They kept his colourful coat and covered it in goat's blood to trick their father into believing that Joseph has been killed by a wild animal. The story continues, and Joseph is sold on to Egypt and to the Egyptians, and actually he works really hard and ends up in a position of authority. But then, through no fault of his own, Joseph ends up in prison. But the Bible tells us that the Lord was with Joseph in prison, and Joseph found favour with the prison guards, and he ends up in charge of the prison. One day, 2 other prisoners have disturbing dreams, and when Joseph sees that they look worried, he asks them why. They share their dreams with Joseph, and he's able to interpret them both. To one who'd been Pharaoh's cupbearer, the interpretation is good, and Joseph tells him that in 3 days he will be restored to his former position. For the other, who had been Pharaoh's chief baker, the interpretation was bad news, and Joseph tells him that in 3 days he will be killed. Joseph asks the cupbearer, "When you're restored to your position, will you remember me to Pharaoh?" Well, Joseph's interpretations come to pass, but the cupbearer forgets all about Joseph and doesn't remember to tell Pharaoh about him. So Joseph remains in prison. 2 years later, Pharaoh has 2 dreams which really upset him, and nobody can tell him what they mean. And finally, the cupbearer remembers Joseph and tells Pharaoh about him. So Pharaoh calls for Joseph, and Joseph is able to tell him what his dreams mean. There will be 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph advises Pharaoh, put someone wise in charge who will make sure enough food is stored up in the 7 years of plenty, that we can be fed through the 7 years of famine. And who does Pharaoh choose to put in charge of the whole land of Egypt? Yes, Joseph. Fast forward a few years, and during the famine, Joseph's brothers go to Egypt to buy food. When they arrive, Joseph sees them and recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. Eventually, Joseph reveals to them who he is and invites them and their father to come and live in Egypt. Sometime later, when their father has died, the brothers panic. They think that Joseph has only been kind to them for their father's sake, and now that their father is gone, Joseph will finally seek revenge for what they did to him all those years before. They go to Joseph and they tell him that their father's dying wish was that he should forgive them, and they throw themselves at Joseph's feet, offering to be his slaves. Then Joseph reassures them with these words, "Don't be afraid. You planned evil against me, but God used those same plans for good." We all experience things in life, maybe not on the scale of what Joseph experienced, but we all have highs and lows, twists and turns. The Bible tells us that throughout Joseph's life, God was with him. Even in the darkest of times, Joseph could have looked at his circumstances and believed that God had left him, given up on him. But God was there, and God used all of it to bring Joseph to a place where he was able to bless and provide for many people. What are you going through right now that makes it feel like God has abandoned you? He hasn't. Jesus promised to be with you always, and Jesus always keeps his promises. Look instead for how God is using your difficult circumstances for good. Nothing is wasted in God's economy. As Paul tells us in Romans, and this is from the Message translation, the moment we get tired in the waiting, God's Spirit is right alongside us, helping us along. If we don't know how or what to pray, it doesn't matter. He does our praying in and for us, making prayer out of our wordless sighs, our aching groans. He knows us far better than we know ourselves, knows our condition, and keeps us present before God. That's why we can be so sure that every detail in our lives of love for God is worked into something good. Amen. God bless you.